Welcome in, everybody, to Once Upon a Pastime series. And tonight it is the curious case of Shoeless Joe to the Hall of Fame. And we'll be doing this on Thursday nights. If you forgot about it and you're catching it late or whatever, we get it. It's kind of a new thing we're doing. We'll be here on Thursday nights, not next Thursday because I have to go to a conference. But outside of that, Thursday nights in the postseason or in the off season, I guess I should say, is when we'll do Once Upon a Pastime series. Good to see you, Cameron. Good to see you, John. And then on Friday nights, we're doing the Braves Country Theater. And essentially what it's going to be tonight is we're going to go into if you never caught one of our Once Upon a Pastimes, a lot of times we play them during the rain delays during the regular season. But basically, we take a chapter in history and go over it. And tonight, we're going to be talking about the curious case of Shoeless Joe Jackson to the Hall of Fame. Now, the reason why we went here, and I'm going to go ahead and read this to begin, and then we'll probably finish off with it. But I do want to make it be known in case some folks just probably don't know. They probably didn't pay attention, for obvious reasons. But in 2025, Commissioner Rob Manfred announced that Major League Baseball has changed its policy that all players are removed from the permanently ineligible list, which is where Pete Rose was sitting, which is where Shoeless Joe Jackson was sitting. And with this decision, Shoeless Joe is once more eligible for the National Baseball Hall of Fame. It's really the first time in earnest that he's been available for the Baseball Hall of Fame. And he'll be under consideration for the Hall of Fame's Classic Baseball Era Committee, and that will not take place until 2027. Now, one thing that you will realize is that in December, and we're doing a show, I think it's the next one that we've actually announced, even though it's a few shows away. We are doing a show in early December, and I believe it's the first Thursday in December. I'd have to look it up, and we've already made a card for it on the channel. But in early December, it's Thursday, December 4th. Once again, it'll be 6 p.m. Good to see you, Uncle Charlie. It's going to be a discussion of who belongs in and who does not belong in the National Baseball Hall of Fame from what they are calling the Contemporary Class Committee. Now, this is a committee, and with all these committees, you have to get 75% of the vote, whether it's all the baseball writers, which is at one point 1,500. Now they've whittled it down quite a bit. Or if it's one of these committees, which tends to be 16 people that have been chosen to vote yes or no. And that's basically all you get. And you only get so many votes, et cetera, et cetera. And we'll get into all that on that night. But there's some big names that are going to be on that contemporary class, and we'll go over that. And that's going to be Dale Murphy for you Braves fans, Fernando Valenzuela for you Dodgers fans, Jeff Kent of the Giants. You've also got Don Mattingly. You've got Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens. I feel like I'm forgetting a couple. I know Carlos Delgado is on it from the Blue Jays. So we'll be doing that on December 4th. And we're doing this one tonight, and we'll do another one on the 20th. And we'll announce that then. Now, obviously, we won't do these on Thanksgiving weekend, give y'all a chance to hang out with the family, because I don't want to oversaturate y'all with this kind of stuff. But we thought it would be fun to get together during the off season once a week and do this. Tomorrow night's show, Braves Country Theater, much different. We're going to go through the 1992 NLCS Game 7, and it's where Sid slid, all that kind of stuff. We're going to replay it and give you our radio call. I'm going to put a link in that chat each night. So Friday night, we'll put it up right before the show starts. And what you're going to want to do, or you can just listen to the radio side of it, is you can sync that with us from a video that we found on YouTube, and we'll call it along with them. And you get an idea. And I want to say tomorrow night's is only like 90 minutes. We're trying to find the shorter ones because we don't want to drag out. We found one where they had edited out a couple of the down innings, where it's a bunch of 1, 2, 3s and whatnot. And we'll get into the nuts and bolts of it. Good to see you, Ladarius. James Fisher, good to see you. I don't know if I've missed anybody else, but tonight is Once Upon a Pastime, and that'll be Shoeless Joe. And once again, if you're just joining us, he will be eligible to the Hall of Fame in 2020 in baseball's Classic Baseball Eras Committee. So with that in mind, now we're going to take a look at not only just his career, but does he deserve to be in because of what he was originally accused of? Does he deserve to be in? It's the same argument that we made last year with Pete Rose. You can go back and watch that video. Now, we made that video before we ever knew that Pete Rose was going to be eligible as well. And of course, they waited until everybody dies, which I don't get that, because I think they think that for some reason, when they do that kind of stuff, is that I think they're under the impression that it's punishing them, blah, blah, blah. Who it's really punishing is the fan. It's really punishing the fan because the fan does not get to enjoy. For instance, if they would have gotten Shoeless Joe in, or we'll just take Pete Rose because it just happened. If they would have gotten Pete Rose into the Hall of Fame while he was alive, the fans could have came from all over to celebrate him. And it wouldn't just be, oh, well, we're teaching him a lesson. He doesn't get to see all this. It's more the fact that the fans get to see him. Don't worry about the one person that you're trying to screw in this whole deal. The fans get to see him. And that's where they lost all of this. Same thing that they did to the fans of the 1920s, the Chicago White Sox, that did not get to see Shoeless Joe Jackson go into the Hall of Fame. And I've got a much different take on this than a lot of folks, because I am more in the school of the people who have been busted for gambling, that until you show me that they definitely did something to throw a ball game, I say let them in. Now, even if they had thrown a ball game, I still say you can let enough time go, and if their resume builds up, I can be talked into it. The guys with the steroids is a totally different story, because they got their numbers because of the steroids, right? The guys that were, Shoeless Joe we're going to talk about tonight, his numbers were not inflated by the 1919 World Series. In fact, his numbers, if we want to hit that first before we go over his entire career, Shoeless Joe, if you're going to try and tell me that he threw anything, okay? Now, the guy had a career 62 WAR. And if you want to put that in perspective, he has a higher WAR than over 60 Hall of Famers that are currently in the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame. Now, I'm not going to rattle off all the names, but I can tell you it's guys like Dennis Eckersley, Todd Helton, Early Wynn, Killebrew, Dazzy Vance, Ichiro, Piazza, Yogi, Vlad Sr., Willie Stargell, Mariano Rivera, who they gave 100% of the vote to, which that's another argument for another night. Fred McGriff for you Braves fans. Big Papi for you Red Sox fans. Whitey Ford for you Yankee fans. All those names have a lower WAR than what Shoeless Joe Jackson had, and he was taken from his prime at the age of 32 years old. In fact, his final season before he was, so the World Series took place in 1919. He played one more year in 1920. And at 32 years old, that was his last season. Before 1921 began, Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis came in, and he kicked out all 8 of those accused, even though they were acquitted in a court of law. All 8 were banned from ever playing Major League Baseball again, and we'll get to that, his quote, in a second. But he played in earnest from 1911, as far as full seasons, to 1920. His first few seasons in the league, the first 2 were appearances at the age of 20 and 21 years old. We only played in 5 games, and in 1910 he only played in 20 games. It was all 3 were tails end of the season. In 1911, he came onto the scene in a big time factor. Good to see you, Tree Nug. And he jumped in with a WAR of 9.2, and that's a pretty hefty one. I mean, if you're not familiar with it, that is a pretty hefty WAR, 9.2. This guy, and this is during the dead ball era. This isn't during some overinflated era. This guy in that era, in the dead ball era, and the reason why they called it that, this was before he played all of his games before you got new balls on the regular. They usually played the entire game with one ball and weighted down with mud and muck. It was hard to see, and the balls that they would hit were usually at some point weighted down from not just the mud, but also the water that would get into the ball, and they would play an entire game. It may just be one ball. Sometimes there were 2 or 3, but they didn't throw out the ball every time it got scuffed up like they do nowadays. They didn't throw out the ball when it went into the stands. In fact, they would get the fans to bring them back into the stands. There's a famous judge ruling that there was a kid that took a foul ball, and what finally get that changed around was that the judge ruled he was just doing what was in a human instinct to do, a young child wanting a souvenir from a ball game he went to. And that eliminated them constantly, because before that, they would demand they get the ball back, number one. And number 2, if you didn't bring the ball back, they would banish you from the stadium, et cetera, et cetera. So anyways, he played his entire career with what they called the dead ball. And the reason why it's called dead ball, the ball wouldn't carry. They didn't break that until Ray Chapman died on the field from one of these weighted balls. They were gray, and the story goes it blended in with the sky that day. It was an overcast day. He didn't see it, hit him in the temple, and by the next day he had died. That led to, we want new balls. We don't want people dying all over the field. It's not good for our brand. That's number 1. And number 2, we'll go ahead and put up a picture. By the way, that's a picture of Shoeless Joe and Babe Ruth, and it's a famous picture. So this is the picture you typically see from it, and it was taken, I believe this is it, yeah. This was actually taken from a newspaper article, and it basically got enhanced and turned into an art of work. And basically what's going on there is it was right before a ball game between the Yankees and the White Sox, and Babe Ruth was showing him a bat from that he used during a previous World Series. This is one of the last pictures taken of Shoeless Joe in his playing career, because this was taken in 1920, and I believe, if I have the date right, it was either late August or early September, and the season ended shortly after. So when I'm giving you these stats, realize he's playing this in the dead ball era. There's a reason why most of the wars in the dead ball era are actually much more significant for the pitchers as opposed to the hitters. Your elite wars in that time period, the guys that were leading the lead, the pitchers, they were 12s and 14s. Now, nowadays, that's unheard of, but they were that dominant because of the dead ball. When I'm telling you that he came in with a 9.2, it was because he had a batting average. This is his rookie year. This still stands as a record today. Shoeless Joe Jackson, as a rookie, 147 games, had a 408 batting average, a 468 on base percentage. Once again, that is a record. Okay, a record. A rookie record, 408 batting average. The on-base percentage is a record. That's an MLB record of 468. He had an OPS of 1058 that year. And though he only hit 7 home runs. That wasn't the era. In fact, there was a guy that led the league in 1911, the same year I'm talking about. His nickname was Home Run Baker because he hit 11 home runs in the season, and everyone just thought that was phenomenal because he was hitting a dead ball. So there's always a misconception from the dopes that you get on social media nowadays that will sit there and try and tell you that the guys back then couldn't play the game today. Horse hockey nonsense. The guys today would have a much more difficult time playing the game of yesteryear because they wouldn't be riding in on comfortable airplanes. They wouldn't be staying in nice hotels. They'd be clicking and clacking either on a train or on some kind of beat up ass bus. They would all be sharing hotel rooms. Nowadays, they all get a room to themselves, and it's the best of times, right? But this was long before there was a players association to fight for those kinds of rights. And these guys would check into hotels, normally 2 to a room, sometimes even more. In fact, there's a famous story where one of the roommates, when they traveled, of Rube Waddell, who's one of my favorite players, but he had it put in his contract that Rube Waddell was not allowed to eat crackers in bed because he got so damn itchy, which was funny as hell. And it's even funnier when you realize Rube Waddell rarely came home. Rube Waddell was known as quite the hound dog and chasing women. In fact, he was famously asked by a reporter one time, how many times have you been married? And he admitted that he couldn't remember how many times that he had been married because he would get out and just get hammered and go to a new town. And if he found a lady he liked, he'd marry her just so he could, And so that's the kind of world that they were living in. And they were playing with much more. They weren't playing with the elite bats. I mean, if you pulled Babe Ruth, Shoeless Joe Jackson out of a tomb and said, hey, you're gonna play today in Major League Baseball with these bats, these gloves, these balls, in these environment, they would have an absolute field day. So anytime you hear someone say, well, the guys that used to play this game couldn't play today, they don't know what they're talking about. Not to mention the fact that they would have access to the same weight training, the same diets, the same weight rooms, and they would be just fine. It really comes down to, can you hit the ball or can you not? And a lot of that has to do with hand-eye coordination. The rest is baseball history. So 1911, a 9.2 WAR. That's off the charts offensively at that time. Ty Cobb led the league with the WAR just over 10. So that was off the charts. In 1912, he had a 9.6 WAR, even better, the second year in the league. He had a little bit of a dip in 1913. He only batted .373. So his first 3 seasons, he bats .408, .395, .373 with OPSs above 1,000. So he wasn't just a slap hitter. In 1914, he plays in only 122 games. His WAR is still right at 5, and he has a batting average of .338. You see where I'm going with this? In 1915, he plays for 2 different teams, and because of the trade, he ends up with a total of 128 games played because there was some downtime and having to be, it wasn't like it is nowadays where you trade someone and they show up in the next city the next day. There was some downtime, so he missed some games there. He still batted .308, which was still elite because it was the dead ball era. I'm telling you, if you ever go back and research this, it was hell getting the ball out of the infield, much less getting extra bases. And we'll get into that in a second. So 1915 passes, and he gives to 1916. It's his first full season with the Chicago White Sox, where he gets traded from what was called the Cleveland Naps, named after Nap LaHoy. Right about this time is when they are named after the first Native American to ever play Major League Baseball, so Cleveland becomes the Indians. But at the time he was playing for them, they were the Naps. And he gets traded to the Chicago White Sox, and the White Sox are putting together a super team. And in 1916, he bats .341. It's just off the chart stuff, right? He has very little power that year, only 3 home runs, but bats .341. In 1917, He still bats 301 and clubs 5 home runs. But once again, you're noticing the batting average. It's ridiculous, right? He's finding a way on base every time. When you see that picture, Babe Ruth, they asked him during the height of his career, who did you model your swing after? And he always answered Shoeless Joe Jackson. We'll put some of his stats up now. Now, this is for the 1919 World Series, which we're about to get into. In 1918, he has a batting average, goes back up to 354. In 1919, he has a batting average of 351. In his final season, 1920, he's batting 382 just before the dead ball era ends. And during this time period, his OPS averages over 1,000 throughout. It ends up taking a dip at the very beginning of his career because he got so little games in. So his lifetime OPS is 940. But if you were to actually eliminate those first 3 seasons, you would get an OPS much higher, right at the 1,000. Yes, Ladarius, that's why they were called the Indians. So it was actually named after. We'll do that one night. I'll do a breakdown of the Cleveland Indians. In fact, it might be the next one we do. That's not a bad idea. Where names came from. I'll have to jot that down, but I actually like that idea. Why did teams change names and all that kind of stuff? I think that would be a fun one. So the Cleveland Indians, Cleveland Naps, trade him to the White Sox, and they're building a super team. And this super team is compiled of guys that the White Sox owner Comiskey is getting from different teams. And he's putting together a squad, but he's not paying them squat. Okay? And that's a problem. And that's what starts all the turmoil of the 1919 World Series. You have guys, so just take for Shoeless Joe for an example. You have a guy that batted 351 with an OPS well over 900. And he's playing very good defensively in the outfield as well. He played center and he played left. Those were his 2 primary positions. And he's being paid very little compared to the standards of guys like the Babe Ruths and whatnot, though he was every bit as good as Babe Ruth at that time. Now, Babe Ruth ends up doing numbers that by the time he ends his career, they dwarf everything because he was doing things people just weren't doing. By the way, we're sitting here at 6:25. Do know this. Tomorrow, we've got a couple things going on. We've got Braves Country today, which will come on at 10 a.m. on this channel. That's only for the Country Club members. At 9 a.m., MLB today. So Fridays is going to be a back-to-back shows. We're going to start off with all the news in baseball, and then after that show ends, we'll talk about the Braves in the NL East. Tonight started the free agency at 5 p.m. Eastern. Free agency began. So we might get some big news coming into tomorrow's, but if not, we're going to lay out where everybody's going. And so that's what those shows are about. And if you've never really endured through an entire off season, I'm thinking of people like Tree Nug who took up baseball this year. It is a constant soap opera. So you kind of have to keep up with it because it doesn't happen all in one fell swoop like it does in the NFL where they wait and they wait and they wait, and then they drop the door open, and then everybody signs, and it kind of slams shut. Honestly, if you don't get signed in the NFL or in the NBA in the first week or two, it's probably not big news. Major League Baseball, there's big news throughout the entire. So it's good and it's bad. I still say, we'll get it tomorrow, but I still say that they need to change their dynamics on it, but it is what it is. All right, back to Shoeless Joe. So getting into some of his numbers, and you see Shoeless Joe in the 1919 World Series. And this is one of the things that when people talk about that he threw the games, even though later on there's a quote made by his teammates that I'll get into in a second that kind of disputes that entire claim. So, and by the way, I don't think I mentioned 1918. 1918 Shoeless Joe only played 17 games because he ended up serving in the U.S. Navy at the shipyard during World War I. So that's why the numbers are skewed from 1908, 1909, and 1910, and then 1918. He doesn't play a whole hell of a lot because of the most players left and took off to go to the war to end all wars, as they called it. All right. And by the way, 1920, his final season in Major League Baseball before he gets banned, .5 WAR. The jury convened in September of 1920, and there you have that. In 1921, early 1921, the new commissioner, Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis, that baseball said, we've got a problem. We've got an image problem. We need a real commissioner. We need someone who's going to set a tone. So they went out and got a judge to run this that really didn't have a lot of baseball experience. And he was known as the type of judge that was famous for big rulings, but a lot of them would get overturned. So he already had kind of a shaky, his entire reputation going in was pretty shaky to begin with, because he was known as that type of judge that would go out and have this big ruling. People say, wow, I can't believe that. And then a few weeks later get overturned because they'd be like, you can't do that. It's unconstitutional. He had that kind of I don't want to call it a swagger, but he had that kind of a reputation. Okay. So, but he didn't care about anybody's opinion. He would go after it. Right. And so with that being said, we've got Kennesaw Mountain Landis coming in, and he's doing this big swooping. His quote was this: regardless of verdicts. Now remember, all 8 of the guys were found not guilty in a court of law because they said there just wasn't enough evidence to prove that these guys threw the World Series. But regardless, in the court of public opinion, they believe that they did. And he said, regardless of verdict of juries, Landis declared, no players, and this is a quote, no player that throws a ball game, no player that undertakes or promises to throw a ball game, no player that sits in a conference with a bunch of crooked players and gamblers where the ways and means of throwing games are plain and discussed and does not promptly tell his club about it will ever play professional baseball again. Why is that particular comment important? I'll tell you why it is. First of all, one of the most famous quotes, and I've got a picture of it on my wall here in the studio, where, and this is from Shoeless Joe. This is years after he was kicked out of baseball. He said, God knows I have given my all to baseball at all times, and no man on earth can truthfully judge me otherwise. So that's his famous quote. He was also known to be a guy that he was not well read. He was not well schooled. In fact, he's got a famous quote. It's pretty funny. They asked him about that. He could not read or write. He was a bumpkin from South Carolina, born in the 1880s, and most of his friends went to work in the textile mill, which is what he did at an early age. Now, he ended up playing for their baseball clubs. All your major, whether it's a mill or any kind of major company back in that day, they had today we would call it a semi-pro team, but they had baseball teams that these guys would play in, and they would make a little extra money after their shift. And they were popular because you didn't have access to go watch MLB TV. You couldn't tune into YouTube and, catch the game, whatever. This is all they had. Remember, this is pre-radio. The first radio broadcast was 1921 out of Pittsburgh. So you're talking about an era where all these guys would go off after work And it was their way of going to the gym like folks do nowadays, trying to stay in shape, et cetera, et cetera. But they would go out and they would play a ball game right after their shift until the sun went down. And that's where he got his start. And that's where he got his nickname, Shoeless Joe, because he famously took his shoes off. The story goes back and forth. We're not 100% sure which story is accurate, but they've all pretty much become the same story, that he was wearing shoes that weren't really fit for baseball. We don't know if they were his work shoes or if they were just worn out cleats, but regardless, started giving him blisters, and he took off his shoes and he ran around his sock feet. And then eventually he took off the socks because they were getting filled up with water and mud and everything like that that would be out in the field. And so he played an entire game and actually had a big hit. I want to say it was a home run, but he had a big hit in the game. And because of that, his nickname became Shoeless Joe before he ever hit the major leagues. So that kind of sets the scene on where he's coming from. And his quote is, it don't take school stuff to make a, sorry, let me start that over. It don't take school stuff to help a fella play baseball. That's another one of his famous quotes. I mean, he's right. Yeah. You don't need to know a whole lot of other things other than catch the ball, throw the ball, hit the ball. And he did it well. So we go into the 1920 scandal and realize he's already one of the best players of all time. And we talked about how in 2025, we got the ruling that he is now going to be eligible in 2027. And that's not nothing. I mean, that's big news for Rose fans, but it's also big news for people like I've been a Shoeless Joe fan for a long, long time. In 1988, there was a movie called 8 Men Out. And then 1989, there was a movie called Field of Dreams. Those are the two main movies that he's ever been depicted in. And I really fell in love with the story. And more so because of Field of Dreams, I watch that more often, rewatch that more often than I've ever watched. I think 8 Men Out's a fine film. It's not one of my favorite baseball films. But it's well done. If you haven't seen it, you need to see it. It's just not one of the ones that I rewatch all the time. Okay. One thing to be noted, because I do want to mention this. Just 4 years ago, October 21st, a signed autograph, not a baseball, not a signed autograph, Shoeless Joe Jackson broke the record at the time for the highest bid in sports photograph history at $1.47 million. So there's still a lot of fans out there, is my point, that still adore Shoeless Joe and still believe that he belongs in the Hall of Fame. And I'll say this many times as I have to. When people say put Pete Rose in the Hall of Fame, put Pete Rose in the Hall of Fame, put Pete Rose in the Hall of Fame, not before Shoeless Joe goes in. Not before. It can happen on the same day, but you can't put Pete in before you put Shoeless Joe in. It would be an abomination. Not to mention alphabetically, let's put Jackson in before Rose. All right. Shoeless Joe, who he did, if you wonder if any of his relatives ever played professional baseball, it wasn't until 2013, a kid by the name of Joseph Ray Jackson, who was his great grandnephew, I believe is who he was. Yeah, great grandnephew, who batted .386 for the Citadel in college baseball. He was drafted by the Texas Rangers in 2013. Now, he didn't end up making anything, but that is something that I'm sure he wears as a badge of honor. Shoeless Joe Jackson was born in Pickens, South Carolina in 1887. He passes away in Greenville, South Carolina in 1951 at the age of 64, and the life that he lived. He had a lifetime batting average of .356, third all time. He's only behind Roger Hornsby at .359, the great Raja, and Ty Cobb at .366. That's the list. That's the list of Major League Baseball players that have had a higher batting average than Shoeless Joe Jackson. That alone should put him in the Hall of Fame, but I digress. The 1911 season, we talked about it a second ago, 408 batting average, still the rookie record, still stands to this day. 408 as a rookie. That's something. Normally, that would win you the batting title, but that year, some guy by the name of Ty Cobb hit 419. It was one of the few times in all of Major League Baseball history that 400 did not win the batting title. But his 468 led the league on on-base percentage. Back then, that wasn't a stat that really people, years and years and years and years in Major League Baseball, the only stats that anybody ever kept up with in the mainstream was what was your batting average, what was your home run total, and your RBI total, and maybe your run total. And then of course, stolen bases. That was it. People didn't fall in love. People didn't even really start getting into slugging percentage until almost a century into the game. So some of these stats that we talk about now, when they were making judgment on who was great and who was not great, they didn't even look at these numbers, and they should have been looking at them. Joe Jackson does, even though he has been banned from Major League Baseball until recently of the new ruling, he still has statues, parks, landmarks built for him all in the South Carolina area. One of them was at Memorial Park, Greenville, at the Shoeless Joe Jackson Memorial Park. A life-size statue was created for Shoeless Joe by South Carolina sculptor Doug Young, which it stands at the West End in Greensville if you're ever in that area. So this is a guy that, even though he's been gone, people continue to tell his tale. When he leaves Major League Baseball and gets kicked out, he ends up going to South Carolina. And before he ends up in Greenville, he lived in a few towns, started out with a dry cleaner that he ran. And when he went to Greenville, it ended up being a liquor store. There's a famous story, famous quote. I think we've played it before many times during the broadcast in our clips, but there's a famous story where Ty Cobb said he went into that package store, is what they were commonly called back then. It is a liquor store. And Joe Jackson is in there running the place. And finally, Ty goes over to him and goes, "What's the matter, Joe? Do you not recognize me?" And sadly, Joe Jackson says back to Ty Cobb and said, "Yeah, I recognize you, Ty. I just didn't think anybody up there wanted to recognize me down here anymore." So it really tore him apart, as you can imagine. This is what he was best at, and it was ripped from him. Now, here's the see, what is John saying? Shoeless Joe has a plaque in Cleveland Monument Park at the stadium. Yes, he does. We're actually ending the show with a plaque into the it's a Hall of Fame like plaque for Joe Jackson. Let me put some of this stuff up here. This, by the way, is a picture of the 1919 White Sox. This was taken before the scandal. I believe it was taken, it was either at the very beginning of the season or it was mid-season, but it was well before the World Series was taken. Where was I at here? Talking about, okay, so his career lifetime, 1,772 hits. He most likely gets to 3,000 if he doesn't get kicked out of the league. On his pace, he would have hit that probably in around 6 years, maybe 7. And Joe Jackson really comes across as someone who probably would have played that long, probably would have played into his late 30s. But even if he didn't, his lifetime batting average is 356. And he had just had a season where he hit 382. It may have been higher. I don't think he beats Ty Cobb because eventually you're going to get regression, but he would have been flirting with it, and he damn sure would have been would have been flirting with beating the Raja, who was known at the time as one of the all-timers. No one really ever talks about Hornsby, but he really was one of the all-timers. His on-base percentage, 423. That's just lights out. His OPS, 940. Why is it not higher? Dead ball era. He was hitting a wet, basically a balloon, a water balloon his entire career. And his OPS plus, and if you don't pay attention to that, averages 100. And what it does, it takes into account the era that you played in, who you played against, and where and what your stats were in those stadiums under those conditions. Now, it's not an exact science, but it's pretty well regarded as, I don't like the OPS plus being talked about in trying to project into a free agent in Major League Baseball. Like, oh, there's OPS. But I don't mind it at the end of his career when you're looking at this is what he would have hit in this era. If 100 is average, and that's what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be 100 is supposed to be good but not great. His OPS plus was 170. That's off the charts. That's higher than a lot of the guys sitting in the Hall of Fame. So he was a great hitter in an era that was not known for hitting. Let's see what else we have here. One thing that I think you'll probably always remember, I think we got brought up in one of our games the other night. Shoeless Joe Jackson is the reason why the famous quote is "Say it ain't so, Joe." And how that came about was that after the indictment from the grand jury, the Chicago White Sox players are leaving the front steps of the courthouse, and a bunch of kids, because Shoeless Joe was their favorite player. He was the Chicago version of Babe Ruth. Now, he didn't live the crazy lifestyle that Babe Ruth did, but he was the Chicago version of Babe Ruth. Every kid growing up in that era wanted to be like Shoeless Joe, wanted to hit like him. And one of the kids famously say it ain't so, Joe, say it ain't so. And someone, a reporter, it's been disputed back and forth, whatever. The reporter said it was said. Shoeless Joe said he doesn't recall it being said. Who the hell knows? But it became famous, and they put it into print. Say it ain't so, Joe. And basically, the kid knew that if he was indicted, he was going to be in trouble. And Shoeless Joe's reaction was, "I'm afraid it is. I'm afraid it is." So that's what the famous "Say it ain't so, Joe." Say it ain't. If you ever hear anyone say it ain't so, that's a reference to Shoeless Joe Jackson. So he reportedly refused the $5,000 bribe twice during the 2019 World Series. Now, this is where we get into the meat of it. Even though it would effectively double his salary for that year. Lefty Williams, his teammate, claims that he tossed the cash on the floor of the hotel room of Shoeless Joe Jackson. He never claimed he saw Shoeless Joe take the money. Okay. Joe Jackson then tried to tell White Sox owner Charles Comiskey, who was infamously cheap, by the way. If you think the reason why the Chicago White Sox were termed the Black Sox of that era because of this dark cloud that was over them, that's not true. The reason why they were referenced to as the White Sox is because Charles Comiskey famously was starting to take their salary and pay for laundry for the uniforms. And so the players decided to hell with that. We don't make enough money as it is. We'll just play in dirty uniforms. And so these pristine white uniforms with the black pinstripes started becoming dingy. They started becoming yucky, mucky. They were playing several days in a row without it. They would wait till they got back home and scrub them at home is basically what they were doing. And so the media started calling them the Black Sox long before the scandal. So they're already known as the Black Sox because he's cheap. Shoeless Joe Jackson goes to Comiskey and tries to tell him, hey, there's a coup involved of the 2019 World Series. These guys are wanting to throw the World Series, and I want to let you know. He refuses to meet with them. Now, there's a lot of different angles on why they say he wouldn't meet with them. He tried twice to have the conversation with Comiskey, and finally he was like, the hell with that. I can't do anything, and if I keep shooting my mouth off, my teammates are going to get irate. So he tries, and so that was well documented. He did try 2 times to meet with Comiskey right before the World Series. Unable to afford legal counsel, Shoeless Joe Jackson was represented by the team attorney, the Chicago White Sox attorney, who really didn't have any skin in the game because he was more worried about protecting the brand of the White Sox, not about the particular players. His name was Alfred Austrian. And before Jackson's grand jury testimony, Austrian, as the story goes, coerced Joe Jackson in admission of his role in the fix by plying him with whiskey. So he got him drunk, and without his wife present, who, by the way, was always present in every contract negotiation for Joe Jackson, because like I told you, he could not read. He could not write. His wife was the learned one, and his wife would always sign the contracts, read them over before he signed anything. But without her present, supposedly, and many people attest to this, so I got to figure this much smoke, there's got to be a little fire, that Austrian gets Joe Jackson liquored up on whiskey. He wasn't a drinker of much. Gets him to sign a contract that he can't read or write, and signing a waiver of immunity to prosecution. So his ass is on the line now. He should have had immunity because he was the one that everyone was saying that guy did not take the money. Look at his World Series numbers. In that World Series, if you're like, okay, well, this guy, whatever, Magee, he probably threw it. He probably didn't try hard. If they had won the series, he would have been the World Series MVP. Listen to these stats. Now, back then, they played best of 9 series. That was one of the few times in 1903 and 1919. I have the list here somewhere. 1920, 1921. I want to say possibly 18 as well. There was a handful of years where they played a best of 9, not a best of 7. In that 8-game series that he played in, he batted .375. He slugged .563. He even hit a home run in the dead ball era. Had 3 doubles, 18 total bases, 12 hits in 32 at-bats, and scored 5 runs. Did not commit an error. There was talk later on that said that some of the pitchers were saying that all the players, including Joe Jackson, didn't seem to be trying hard at making certain plays. He was never charged with an error, so that's all perception. And we all know how pitchers are. Pitchers are never going to admit a ball got rocked. So everything points to the fact that he was trying. Everything points to the fact he tried to tell his owner, man, the fix is in. And Joe Jackson, by the way, in the 1917 series, which they did win, he batted .304, 2 RBIs, a walk. In 6 games, he had total seven total bases. Did not have an extra base hit. So in the World Series that they won, compared to the World Series that they lost, Joe Jackson had a much better series in the 1919 World Series. Much better. It's not even close. And he was in prime years. I mean, we're only talking about 2 years apart. What was he? That would have made him 28, I believe, at that point. Right there in that neighborhood. So the idea that he played poorly in the World Series is hogwash. Good to see you, Willis. See if I missed him at PETA. See if I see anyone else in here. I've seen the chat going along and just haven't been able to keep up with it. All right, so back to the Shoeless Joe Jackson. And when we do these things on Thursday, don't worry, football fans. We're going to be done plenty of time, well before the NFL kicks off. We're also going to be make sure that's why we're doing them at 6:00 on Thursday and Friday, because Fridays you have some college football games that kick off. And I know there are NBA fans. We're going to try to get all this stuff done right around 7:30-ish, somewhere in that neighborhood, give or take. All right, so now we lay that out with Shoeless Joe. He would have been the World Series MVP. No one even came close to those batting marks in the World Series. He went to the owner 2 times that have been documented and proven. So what the hell are we talking about? So why was he put into the mix? We'll get to that here in a second. Actually, I've got it right in front of me. I might as well call it off now. Years later, the other 7 players that were kicked out for the Chicago Black Sox, the 8 men out, right? What the whole movie's about. The other 7 players implicated in the scandal all confirmed that Joe Jackson was never at any meetings. So that whole thing that I read you where Landis was saying anybody who's been in any kind of meetings, blah, 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 that's fair to make that comment back then to the players that were in that meeting. He was never at a meeting. And Williams said they only mentioned Joe Jackson's name in their plot to the mob. It was the Chicago mob, and they were involved with the New York mob. If you ever watched the show Boardwalk Empire, this actually gets intertwined into it. Really, really good show. It's not really a baseball show, but this thing gets intertwined into it. It's really, really worth. It's a good show worth watching is what I'm trying to get at. But Williams said they only mentioned Shoeless Joe Jackson because he was the Babe Ruth of the Chicago White Sox to give them credibility. And although he did not say why Jackson was offered the $5,000 and did not accept it, and why he threw it on the floor, he never had a good answer for that. Jackson said he never saw it, never. What it sounds like Williams took the $5,000, stuck in his pocket, and said, hell, he doesn't want to throw the series anyways. Let him be Mr. Goody Two-Shoes. And in the end, he threw him under the bus and said, no. I talk because he didn't want the mob coming or chopping off his head. That's my guesstimation of the whole thing. Because the mob would have been infuriated to know that, hey, you just took an extra cut is what you did. That money didn't belong to you. We were giving it to all you players the same, and you kept it. That's what I think happened. And there was never any evidence that Shoeless Joe was $5,000 richer, which back in that day was, if you add inflation, damn near $100,000. The whole thing stinks. It all falls apart. And the fact that all 7 players, if 2 or 3 would have said, no, that's not true, he was involved, I'd have to sit here and go, even though I still believe he would belong in the Hall of Fame after 100 years, I would have to say, you did something bad, you kind of had to pay the piper. All 7 admitted Joe Jackson had nothing to do with it. Nothing. So when you put that in, the only other argument that you can have is that he wasn't good enough to be in the Hall of Fame. That's simply not the case. We told you earlier in the show, if you're just joining us, he has a higher career WAR than over 60 players who are currently in the Hall of Fame. He was coerced by his attorney that was paid for him by the Chicago White Sox, Miskey, who, though it seems that he was fairly loyal, had no real reason for them to be loyal to him. Here it is. The best of 9 series, if you are wondering about this, they did it in the first one in 1903. Boston Americans that eventually become the Boston Red Sox. They win 5-3. In 1912, there were 8 games, but that was only because one game was called. It was game 2 or I believe it was game 3. It was either game 2 or game 3 called because of darkness. So they played 8 games, but the Red Sox beat the New York Giants 4-3. And technically it's looked at as 4-3-1 that one game was 6-6. It was a tie and was called because of darkness, because obviously back then they didn't have lights on the field. And then the other ones were 1920 or 1919, obviously the Reds over the White Sox. 1920, the Indians over the Brooklyn Robins, now known as the Los Angeles Dodgers. 1921, and that's it. So that's your list. So there was 4, but technically 5, and none of them ever went the distance. In other words, none of them were ever played 9. And if you remember during one of the games earlier in this postseason, somebody, it was one of the national idiots that was suggesting that we should do best of 9 in baseball. I think it was one of the Braves idiots. But anyways, I want to say, I almost positive I know who it was. But anyways, I won't smear him because he's not here to defend himself, and I'm not 100% sure. But I'm pretty sure that he's one of the television idiots. Anyways, wants to play a best of 9 when you're considering all these arms that are falling off and teams are just barely finding a way to get there. A, that would never happen. B, the other times we've tried a best of 9, it's never been needed. Best of 7's fine. It's perfect. It's perfect. Don't screw around with perfection. Now, post playing time, Shoeless Joe ends up playing about 20 years after his banishment from baseball. People said that they saw him playing into his early 50s. But he spent some time in Louisiana, and there was a pretty cool article that I came across where the Claiborne Parish Library historian Wes Harris thinks Shoeless Joe may have kept his Louisiana baseball connections after playing in New Orleans and landed him on a team at Bastrop after he was banned from professional baseball. Jackson appealed his suspension in 1923, but in between the banishment in early 21, and the 1923 season where he applied for reinstatement, he stayed in shape by playing what was minor league ball down in Louisiana. It had pretty good stats, but I wasn't going to add those stats because that's just not fair to the argument. By early June of 1923, he played under the assumed name of Joe Johnson on many teams, in fact, one in Bastrop, Louisiana. And he gave away a pair of socks to a little boy named Paul Thomas at one of the games in Louisiana at the 1923 in Homer, Louisiana, and that eventually sold at auction a few times for several $100,000 throughout the years. It's kind of ironic. He gives a kid a pair of socks, which means he probably took them off him. So Shoeless Joe was shoeless once again. But during the remaining of his 20 years of his baseball career, he played for semi teams. Some were located in Louisiana, like I just stated. Some were in Georgia, and some were in South Carolina. They were all under assumed names. Usually something like a Joe Johnson, Bill Jackson, that kind of thing. He didn't want to go too far off because he wanted to make sure people, when they were referencing him out in the field, that he knew what he was. He wasn't saying, "Hey, Ricky," and he's like standing there not paying attention. The ball gets you hit in the head. But he was never reinstated into professional baseball. I told you earlier that his wife, Katie, and he ran a dry cleaner in Savannah, Georgia. They moved to Greenville, North Carolina, where he ran the liquor store. and that's where he passed away at the age of 64. He is in the 1951 Cleveland Indians Hall of Fame. And that took some backlash at the time. He didn't play for Cleveland very long, but he is in the Cleveland Indians Hall of Fame. I don't know if they renamed it, but that's what it was called at that point, so that's what I'm calling it. In 1989, Commissioner Bartlett Giamatti, the same guy who had the run-in with Pete Rose, declined reinstatement to Shoeless Joe Jackson because he said it is now best given to historical analysis and debate opposed to present-day review with an eye to reinstatement. All right? They said, we'll see that. In 1999, so 10 years later, the U.S. House of Representatives passed a resolution saying Shoeless Joe Jackson's sporting achievement, encouraging MLB to rescind his ineligibility. It fell on deaf ears, never got taken care of. Bud Selig was in charge of the league at the time. I'm not putting it all on Bud, because it's not like Manfraud came in and did anything about it. He didn't do it until now after Pete Rose died. I still have a problem with that. And there may be things behind the scene that we don't understand on why it took him so long to do that. And maybe he's got a lot of pressure from other entities that say, we don't want him in, whatever. But I still think when it's all said and done, first of all, you could have saved your legacy by letting Pete Rose and Shoeless Jackson become eligible before Pete Rose passes away. Nothing could be done about the whole Shoeless Joe thing. It happened 6-7 decades after you took office, but you could have done something about Pete Rose. And the fans, and I still say the fans are going to come in. It's 2027. I expect Shoeless Joe Jackson and Pete Rose to kick the door through in the classic baseball era committee that is going to take place. I believe that would set it up for 2028. I could be wrong on that. Maybe it's 26. They'll do the vote, and 27 would be the hall. But I believe it's 2027. And I'll tell you what, the world of baseball might need that bright sunny day after what we may endure, not this offseason, but next offseason when the lockout strike happens. Because that's 1,000% happening unless something dramatic happens. So to me, I would do it at the end of 2026, going into 27, to kind of turn the page of whatever is going to happen. I don't know how long of a work stoppage we're going to get in 2026, but if it's anything like the one in 2021 where we went right to the cusp of almost affecting games, I think it's actually going to be worse. I hate to rain on everybody's parade about that, but it's a thing to keep an eye on. Is it, do they move it up to be able to help the brand of Major League Baseball if they end up missing games next season? Not this coming season, but the following season in 2027. And see if there's anything else I want to add here. Had a bunch of different notes that I wanted to make sure that I think I hit most of it, all the important stuff. Once again, just one of the truly great. Anybody that saw him just said the ball sounded different. Whenever they talk about guys like that, the ball sounded different coming off his bat. One of the just truly great characters of the game, but also players of the game. They always say that all these guys that are all-timers, that their eyesight is just off the charts. And I would tend to believe that that's what the deal is with Shoeless Joe Jackson, because they recognize pitches quicker than you and I would recognize. They recognize pitches quicker than guys who are playing in major leagues today. The elite of the elite had the eyesight and then also the hand-eye coordination to grip it and rip it when they saw what they saw and knew what they were looking at. And you look at his numbers and you see that some of his numbers have just stood the test of time. What is this one right here that I have? Career. Once again, those are his career stats. I think I've hit all the pictures that I wanted to put up there. There is one last one. And before we leave tonight, I want to take any kind of questions or comments in the chat. So if you've got anything that you want to add, please fire away right now. I wasn't able to see most of it when it was scrolling. I know a lot of y'all talk about a lot of different things in the chat. So I try not to keep up with it when I'm doing something like this, because I'm going to get sidetracked and I'm going to want to know why there was something. What was it? Something was being said. Why Peter was talking about her dad her papa was born in April 10th of 1918. I'm sure it had something to do with what I was talking about with the Shoeless Joe Jackson. But if anybody's got anything else that they want to throw in here, let me see here. Where is that thing at? I got a picture here somewhere that was here. It is. Basically, it's saying, does he belong in the Hall of Fame? That's what the picture shows. It shows the stats that I just showed you that are a little smaller, but I got this from a Facebook. I believe it was a Facebook picture, something that I Googled, and said, you hold the deciding vote in the Hall of Fame of Shoeless Joe Jackson. Does he get in or does he not get in? And if you can just put a Y or an N in the chat, I would be interested to see. And then also, if any of y'all have any questions or comments about this topic, Shoeless Joe, I'm all ears. I obviously don't know it all. Nobody can know it all, and it's always great for to learn this kind of stuff. Well, I appreciate the kind words, Charlie and Willis. I think the history of the game ties the fans to the game, and that's why it's very important to me. It's why I do the on this dates in history during the season. We make the TikToks, but we're using those TikToks to be able to have something to put on the show. If you follow Braves Country X on TikTok, those will revamp back up during the season. But we do that to be able to me, it's the only sport that you can really talk about the history of the game. And the guy that played in the 1919 World Series, you can still compare his stats to the guys that played in the 1925 or the 2025 World Series. To me, it's a different sport. And because the game has been such a steady pace over the years, and it's played every day, the stories are just so much better. We're talking about the game of football where they play what? If you're a college fan, they play a dozen games a year. If you're an NFL fan, I know they're getting up to 20, but for years they played 14 to 16 games a year. The stories just aren't as good. The history isn't as good. And I'm fans of the other sports, but nothing's like baseball. Real quick, why does the government have that? They didn't have a government. They didn't, Peter. What they did is they responded to what Giamatti said, that basically said, we need to have an oversight committee at this. And it's basically, he passed the buck. He didn't want to be involved. So they brought it to Congress. Major League Baseball brought it to Congress. There were a couple of folks that wanted to see it talked about in Congress. And what they do, if you ever seen these types of things, they didn't pass a law that said you had to put him in the Hall of Fame. What they did was that they said that we encourage him to be open back up. And at the time, there was no talk about doing Pete Rose. They were saying that it should be open back up and let the voters decide. That's basically all they were saying. Now, they didn't say you had to. They didn't make it a law. They have no jurisdiction over Major League Baseball. But it was basically putting them on notice on blast. I remember when that happened. I was a fairly young man at the time, and I remember going, yes, finally. And then nothing happened. Next thing you know, we have much more important fish to fry. A couple years later, 9/11, the whole 9 yards, right? But at the time, 1999, I remember when I didn't even know the exact date when I saw it, but I remember it was the late 90s. And I remember being excited about it. Mid to late 90s is when I really, truly fell in love with the game of baseball. It was already coming for me in the early 80s as a young kid. And I was just as big a baseball fan as I was a football fan and basketball fans growing up. But it was the mid to late 90s where it became my primary sport that I followed and loved, and it's because of the history. Tomorrow, real quick note, tomorrow, 9 a.m., open to the public. We're going to do MLB Today. We'll be going over anything that goes on. I didn't catch the entire tweet, but I did see that there's something going on about some minor moves in free agency. Remember, it started just a couple hours ago. And Jeff Passan was the one that announced it. He blocked me during the last players strike, the lockout, because I called him on his BS and he got mad and blocked me. So I always have to catch someone else retweeting his tweets. But he was announcing some kind of move. I did see that this isn't a big deal, but the Braves claimed Michael Ciani off waivers from St. Louis. There's gonna be all kinds of minor deals like that, and we'll talk about that tomorrow. So 9 a.m. tomorrow, MLB Today, open to the public. 10 a.m., you got to be a country club member. We're going to talk Braves and everything in the NL. So we'll go over the new manager-ish. I mean, is he new? And the new managers he brought in. If you missed that, there has been some actual changes, and excited to talk about that. But I wanted to leave these types of shows for what they are for. And if that's it, then good to see you, Lonely Satellite. And I don't know if I saw anyone else. If I missed anybody, I do apologize. Philip, good to see you. See, Daniel, good to see you. And we will catch you next time. Peter was talking about Willis's mom was born in 1939. Okay. I guess y'all are just talking about when everybody was born. My grandfather, who grew up, who's one of the main reasons why I became a baseball fan, my grandfather on my mom's side, he was born, I believe it was 1906. Might be off by a year or two, but 1906. So he grew up during this era, and he watched in Brooklyn. He was a Brooklyn Dodger / they changed their name a few times, but for lack of a better term, he was a Brooklyn Dodger guy until they moved to Los Angeles, where he could not bring himself to pull for the, as he called them, the great Brooklyn Dodgers and the hated New York baseball Giants till the day he died. We'll see you next time. I'll have to look for it, John. I don't know what you're talking about. We'll see you next time. There will be no show next Thursday because I've got a conference I have to go to. But the following Thursday, I think it would be a good thing to go over the names, how these teams got their names. I think that was a good suggestion by Ladarius. And then we'll be doing this on Thursdays when there's not a major holiday. We'll be doing this on Thursdays, and Friday night, tomorrow night, we're doing the Braves Country Theater when Sid slid. Where were you when Sid slid? And once again, if you're just joining us, I'm going to put the link in the chat tomorrow before the show. So if you want to do this with us, you're going to need a second device to watch the game along on YouTube as I call the game and give you my thoughts and opinions as the game goes on. And I want to say the one we found that we're going to play tomorrow is only about 90 minutes, so it's not going to take up a big part of your Friday night. And look, if you miss it late, just catch us late. Please share, and want to thank all of y'all for joining us for Braves Country Radio. I wanted to make the announcement tonight, but I did mention it this morning on our football channel, Armchair Quarterback Radio. Thank you for everyone who tuned in, because we shattered our old record for the postseason from September 30th until November 1st. So just over a month, the Major League Baseball playoffs, 1.2 million views on the Major League Baseball playoffs. And that ain't nothing. I didn't think that was even possible for this little rinky-dink channel that I started just August of 2021 that we actually started calling these games. All right, y'all have a great one. Hopefully next year it's even bigger and we continue to, because I want to build this community where we got baseball fans of all teams, of all different teams. Hell, we'll even let Mets fans hang out with us. I mean, maybe. We'll see you next.
Goodbye, sweetheart. Well, it's time to go. We're back tomorrow with another show. Well, unless we're fired, we'll talk to you then. Goodbye, sweetheart. Goodbye. Goodbye.
Guys and gals, it's time to go. We'll see you on the next show.
Same bat time, same bat channel.
It's closing time, y'all. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. Have a great one. On your way out, please like and subscribe. And don't forget to tip your favorite bartender. We'll see you. I'm Mac Magee, signing off for Braves Country Radio.